Oh, hello my friends. Hope you are well. Today I'm back with another installment of the Kitbashed Imperial Guard army build, and we're going to be turning a regular old boring Chimera into the open top troop transport before you. Is it safe for the battlefield? Probably not, but it is filled with our cheeky little green boys, so who cares?
Swamp Ramp. Miniatures.
Now on the tabletop, the Chimera functions as a weaponized battle taxi for up to 12 miniatures, and although this regular version is kinda ugly in my opinion, it's still worth having in a guard army thanks to its extra firepower and mobility. To fit with the other units we've kitbashed so far, I wanted this to be a bit different from the regular Imperial Guard stuff, and I decided to modify it into something similar to the landing ships of World War II, basically reversing the current Chimera design by putting the turret on the back and the crew compartment up front instead. I really like this idea as it seemed fitting for our green boys to take something that has a good potential for crew survivability with its enclosed and heavily armoured crew compartment on the rear of the vehicle, and instead turn it into an open top death trap that's built to spew them out the front end as fast as possible. I've been trying to think of ways to add a bit more variety to the army build recently, and one of the ways I wanted to do that is by kind of dividing the green boys into sub-clans depending on the area of the swamp they live in. So they'll all still come together as one big army and fight under the same flag, but they'll each have a slightly different focus on the types of unit they field. We'll probably have one group that specialises in adapting old Imperial Guard kit into weaponized swamp creature hybrids like the Arachnorus and Mollusk Cannon we've made previously, and we'll have others like the South Swamp Pink Nose Clan that we're introducing today, who focus on mobility and scout tactics, adapting their weapons and vehicles to reflect this. And the first of these adaptations on the Chimera has been to remove about 2/3 of the hull and strip away any unneeded weapons to make it as light and as agile as possible. I also wanted to make sure the turret could still articulate just for the sake of taking some cool photos more than anything, so I transplanted the ring on top of the new smaller crew compartment and used a bit of plasticard to fill the gap. This was a quick little changeover, but I wanted to make sure the landing bay door could be raised and lowered too, as this would let us see our green boys in their compartment and also add a bit of visual fun for when we're dropping off our troops on the tabletop. I decided the easiest way to do this would just be shoving in a styrene rod that I could glue the door onto, so I made the holes for it just big enough that it could spin around, but still snug enough that it wouldn't be flapping about on its own like my nan's bingo wings. I trimmed the door down a bit so it would fit the gap without being blasted on accident by the turret, and then squared off the styrene rod to give me a better surface to glue it onto. I was really happy with how it looked until I realised I had a solid 5 degrees of movement only, but that was fairly easy to sort out with a few gentle adjustments. With that, we had a lovely little ramp for our boys to disembark and ride their BMXs on, and I was definitely pleased with the overall structure of the kitbash so far. It just needed a few little touches now to finish everything off. The first of these touches were some quick and easy cuts of diamond texture plasticard to give a little bit more slope protection over the heads of our troops, and I followed that up by dremeling off the details on the front of the landing bay door so I could instead add some of our signature scrappy Imperial Guard wooden armour. I only added this up front today as I wanted to keep the sides of the vehicle plain for painting later, but it wouldn't feel right to not include it at all. Next, I wanted to add a little swamp tree growing out the back like I have in a couple of the previous builds, so I did this using my same old wire and hot glue method, finishing it off with a muddy texture paste over the top to give it a slightly more natural appearance. Then, for the very last detail, I wanted to try my hand at some welding beads a la Night Shift, as I thought they could add to the modified vibe of the Chimera, and these came out kind of good, not great. I definitely got the hang of it towards the end, but the ones I first did looked like an absolute hot mess, so I decided to scrape them off and redo them, which kind of looked marginally better maybe, but these ones by the turret still look pretty bad, but they weren't very visible when it was in place, so I didn't bother with those. But yes, there we go, our Chimera build is now complete, and I think those last little details will help to keep it recognisable as part of our Imperial Guard army. I just needed to whip up a little scout party to ride in the compartment now. And I had a bunch of these Cadian shock troopers laying around from somewhere, so I gave them the odd razzle-dazzle green boy treatment, equipping some Gretchen heads with my moulded green stuff helmets and other spare bits, and then whacking them onto the bodies with the help of some green stuff to broach the gaps. I think the Gretchen heads are ever so slightly too big for the shock trooper bodies in proportion, but it does also make them look even funnier, so f*** it. My plan was to have these larger green boys at the back of the troop compartment to make it feel a bit more crowded, but I also wanted to have a couple of our smaller boys up front where the ramp lowers. So I whipped up a couple of these using some moulded and leftover parts on the cutie little Gretchen bodies. And then finally for the driver, I just hollowed out this kind of cool looking cyborg helmet from the Chimera driver and whacked it onto a Gretchen head too. So not my most intricate kit bashes really, but most of them will barely be visible anyway, so we're on to the painting. Now, as I was saying earlier, I wanted to start bringing a bit more variety into the paint jobs for this army to help distinguish between some of the different subclans that'll be making up our wider army, and also to make it a bit more interesting when you're watching these videos. Since the South Swamp Pinknose clan have a larger focus on mobility and scouting and less of a focus on pure heavy armor, I wanted to give them a camouflage scheme that would make them a bit more stealthy when moving through the swamps. I still want it to be on theme with the Swampiral Guard obviously, so I've gone with our usual purple base coat, but I'm then building up some muddy camo stripes by kind of over brushing on a medium brown colour to get a slightly more worn look compared to just blocking in the brown with full coverage. I added some purple paint chips and little scratchy bits next by stippling on our base colour and running a brush down some of the outer edges, and this combined well with the slightly more patchy appearance of the brown to make it look like this Chimera has been tearing through the swamplands, getting all scratched up. After that, I just had all the usual kind of remaining details left, like the tracks, which got a black base coat and a slight metallic overbrushing to give them some definition, and the other metallic details that got a full blocking in with a dark metallic colour and a black wash to help tone that down a bit. For the wooden armour, I did my usual kind of paint scheme here, nothing too fancy, just starting with a contrast base coat, adding some sketchy little wood grain highlights here and there, and finishing it off with a dark green wash. The tree got pretty much the same treatment too, with an extra layer of mossy green stippled highlights at the end for good measure, and I touched in the last details, which were these little Aquila insignia thingies. And then in the interest of mixing it up a bit once more, I'm testing out some dark green streaking grime today instead of my usual kind of brown one, and this stuff's supposed to be used on green vehicles apparently, but I was curious to see whether it would work well on top of our usual purple colour scheme and add that nice swampy grime we like to see. And yeah, in the end it worked pretty well, which is no surprise as streaking grime is basically liquid gold. It doesn't look drastically different from the brown I normally use, but I think the subtle green tones do suit the swampy environment, so I'll probably be using this one moving forward. I did a bit of stippling with our purple and brown camouflage colours on the main hull to add some little areas of higher contrast and scratchy damage, freshened up the wood slightly, and then came in with a final bit of dirty down rust, applying it quite heavily on the main weapon and the pieces of metallic armour, and then adding some little streaks of rust coming down from the rivets. That was looking pretty good to me at this point. The camo was really simple and easy, but I think it gives quite a nice effect overall, and we've still got our classic Swampiral purple colours here to stay on theme. So it was time for our green boys now. And I'm going to be painting these guys up in the exact same scheme I've been using so far this army, barring one small change at the end. So I wanted to just take this time to thank everyone that's been watching my videos recently, and an extra big thank you to everyone that comments and gives feedback too, as it really helps me to improve. We're still a small channel relatively speaking, but I really appreciate the support everyone's been giving me. You know, I love seeing familiar names pop up in the comments, and I love interacting with everyone there to find out what you guys are working on or talk about ways I could have made my own builds better. We're going forward into the new year now, and I'm feeling really excited about all the different builds I'll be doing and the videos to go along with them, so let me know if you have any feedback or suggestions for future builds. And once again, thank you to everyone that watches and supports. Big love from your boy Swamp Rat. But anyway, I haven't gone too crazy trying to get these guys perfect today, as the majority of them are going to be tucked away out of sight in the crew compartment, but I did want to finish them off by just working in their clan namesake, being their little pink noses and some areas around the mouth too, for good measure. I think this is quite a nice little touch on goblins and green boys, but I didn't want to commit to it on my whole army, so it'll be a nice way of distinguishing our South Swamp Pinknose clan from our other units. With all the painting done, I glued our boys into place in the crew compartment, chucked on a little bit of mud around the tracks that helped them look a bit more gnarly, and the very final touch was to add a bit of swampy foliage on the tree. That was the build completed, so let's see how it came out. So my friends, what do you think of this happy little Chimera? I honestly really like it, and it may have just crept past the Arachnarust to become my favourite build of the army so far. It's not as kind of wacky as that is, but yeah, I just think it's really cool, and I'm feeling pretty excited about having different sub-clans within the Guard, who will each have their own slightly different vibe and aesthetic going on, with the South Swamp Pink Nose clan being the first of these. It's funny because at the beginning of this army I was planning to hit around 2,000 or so points with a few extras thrown in for fun, but I feel like the more I build the more excited I get, and I'm now wondering if this project is ever actually going to end, or if my house is just going to become full of tiny little green goblin men in armoured vehicles with different coloured noses. I suppose time will tell, but for now, if you enjoyed this video then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. Let me know what other clans I can add to the overall army, and let me know how many cheese strings you realistically think you could eat before you're sick. As always, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.